Hurricane Beryl made landfall as a Category 1 storm a year ago today, bringing powerful winds, prolonged power outages, flooding, and a summer heat wave that tested our city's resilience. Thousands remained in the dark for days, while sweltering heat pushed some into emergency cooling centers. And for others, the consequences were fatal. Today, we'll discuss what we've learned over the past year, what infrastructure changes are still needed, how agencies and communities can better prepare for compound disasters, and why electricity resilience matters as much as flood safety. This in the backdrop of the flooding in Central Texas this past weekend. To break this all down, we welcome Ed Emmett, fellow in Energy and Transportation Policy at Rice's Baker Institute and former Harris County judge, and Jim Blackburn, an environmental lawyer and professor in the practice of environmental law at Rice University. Ed and Jim, welcome to Hello Houston.
It's good to be here.
Yep, thanks, Celeste.
And if you would like to join into the conversation and you have questions, please feel free to give us a call. It's 713-440-8870. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I know we want to talk about Beryl and what happened in Beryl, but it's hard to get into that conversation without also looking at what happened this weekend. And Judge, I know a lot of the conversation right now, and it may in many ways be too soon to even be talking about this, but it's about the way the warnings went out. And I think you have a unique understanding of how that whole system works. And if you could help people understand in general how these warnings come and how they're processed.
Well, of course, the tragedy in Central Texas is just something that is hard to wrap around right now. But you also have to understand that it is a more rural area. Unlike here where we have media outlets, you have a lot of attention, they don't have that. And what happened, the warning system that was in place, the National Weather Service, and certainly Jim can talk about that, he's well aware of those, they come out with a flood watch and then a flood warning. Well, the watch came out during the afternoon, and anybody who's been in Central Texas, in the hill country, you know about flash floods. They occur fairly frequently. The magnitude of this one was just so much greater that by the time the flood warning went out, it was after 1 o'clock in the morning. People had gone to sleep. There's no adequate warning system. And ironically, you're right, there will be plenty of time to discuss it later. The Kerr County officials had applied for a grant to update the warning system. They did not get the grant. It didn't get updated. And in today's modern technology, these things we wear, our cell phones, really should be the key to that warning system. But there will be plenty of time to go back and look and say what should have happened, and we'll learn from it.
It's interesting that you mention our cell phones, and I think that is what a lot of people are questioning is in this area, self-service can be spotty. So besides services and cell phones, do you think those alarms should have been implemented there along the Guadalupe River in Kerr County?
Well, whether I think so or not, you have to understand that we're dealing with a 20-mile stretch of river. So how close together do you put the alarms? Would people have paid attention? It's the middle of the night. You hear a siren going off. Is that going to make you get up and leave? I know we're going to talk about Camp Mystic. You have to because it's been on everybody's mind. It's been there 100 years. This has never happened. So there will be lessons learned, and there'll be time for finger pointing after the fact. Yeah. But how do we go forward? I'm going to give you an example that's a little off key, but I grew up in New London, Texas. New London, Texas is still the scene of the worst school disaster in American history. 300 people died when the school blew up because natural gas, you couldn't smell it. Immediately after that, odorizer was added to natural gas. So changes are going to be made so that this doesn't happen again, and that's little comfort to people who have lost loved ones and suffered through what we have now. But no, I do think there will be full court press put on a better warning system.
Jim, the judge talks about the warnings. I'm curious, Celeste and I were talking about this a little earlier, about warning fatigue, that people hear these and they become just white noise after a while, especially if you're in an area that's prone to flash flooding. I guess my question is, or my platform for you, is to remind people how important these warnings truly are.
Well, there's no doubt about it, Ernie. The warnings are essential. We don't have I think across the state, there's no comprehensive warning system. There's no comprehensive warning structure. I think warnings would be one of the things I would say that we'll learn about and will come out of this kind of horrible tragedy in the Hill Country. But the other thing, you're talking about fatigue. We are not, I don't think, facing the truth of the situation that is in front of us. The rate of rainfall that they experienced, I was up in Austin, I was in Wimberley during the event. I wasn't on the Guadalupe, but I was getting, certainly the next day newscasts, pretty regularly. And they were talking about 3 hours of rain at 4 inches an hour. And that is an incredible rate of rainfall. And, that's what I am most concerned about, is that we're not telling our people about the types of storms that we are seeing and that we will see in the future. I don't think we've been honest about climate change, and I think climate change is at the center of this. The storm that we saw dumped an incredible amount of rain in an incredibly short period of time. It's, every storm, it seems like we keep hearing the officials say, my gosh, we've not seen anything quite like this. And Ed and I were talking, before about, before Harvey, we had a couple of 500-year storms. So that is the reality of today. And, fatigue or not, I don't think we're hearing enough about how serious these storms are. And not only is it about rainfall, it's about surge flooding and about windstorm as well.
And it's interesting you use the word comprehensive warning system across the state. From what I understand, Governor Abbott has said he will most likely be calling a special session that will specifically address warnings, that a system that would go across the state.
Well, that would be an excellent result coming out of this. It's horrible that it takes a tragedy, but I think it's kind of the way we work. It's tragedies do cause funding and that type of thing to be, and certainly attention to be focused.
I do believe there was a bill that was authored and brought up during this 89th Texas Legislative.
Correct.
There was. Can you all elaborate on that for us?
I don't know a lot of details about it, Ed. Do you?
I know it passed the House of Representatives and failed in the Senate.
Okay.
And what I understand is that bill is going to be reintroduced during this special session. What you also have to understand, we sit in Harris County, which I think has arguably the best Office of Emergency Management in the country. NIMKID and the Texas Department of Emergency Management are excellent. But Kerr County is a rural county. It doesn't have a tax base. It can't put together the kind of OEM that we have here. So the state needs to really start looking at what's the state's role in areas that have I hate to get off on it. We spend so much time talking about we're going to lower your taxes, we're going to lower your taxes, we're going to lower your taxes. Sooner or later, somebody's got to pay for something.
And that was something that was brought up, I believe, back in 2016 as well as 2023, right there in Kerr County. It was been brought up multiple times about this. From what I understand, the conversation was really sparked and it continued to come up during the 1987 flooding that was happening in that area. And that was one of the bottom lines, was the judge said that it just wasn't a priority, and taxes. People didn't want to pay more taxes.
Sure, we look at that here. Unfortunately, voters and residents have short memories. 2018, the polls all showed flooding was the number one concern. You take that same poll now, flooding's not on the list.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me in what Jim was saying a few minutes ago is you say 4 inches of rain an hour, and to the uneducated person, you hear 4 inches. It's a little bit, 4 inches. You don't realize the impact that truly has. You watch what happens.
Well, a heavy rain is 1 inch or 2 inches an hour. I mean, that's serious rainfall. But you also have to think about the Hill Country. I mean, those are limestone hills. They've got a lot of topography. I mean, here we get a lot of rain, and in a lot of places it just stays. You may get flooded, but it's kind of gentle rising water that comes up and unfortunately goes into our houses many times. This is water that's rushing down a hillside, comes together. Ed, you were talking about some statistics that when we were outside, you might want to share those statistics.
Yeah, at midnight, the level of the Guadalupe River was 7 feet, but the flow rate was 8 cubic feet per second. By 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:15 in the morning, the level had risen to 29.5 feet, but that's not the big deal. The flow rate was 120,000 cubic feet per second. From 8 cubic feet per second to 120,000. That's what Jim was talking about. That water all gets funneled down, and you can't even comprehend that.
No, it is beyond our ability, I think, to conceive. And I think if I were to say one thing I think we're lacking almost across the board is we need to be able to conceive the impacts of these storms. We need to be able to better visualize what these warnings are about, because you're talking about warning fatigue. On the other hand, I don't think we talk enough about these things, but because we're not educated enough, I don't think, as a public.
Now, Jim, can you talk to us about, from what I understand, that area had been in a very long drought. And would that have had any impact at all on the ground?
I've heard it said that it did. I'm not so sure I believe that so much. I mean, a gentle rain would have perhaps been more impacted, but when you have that rate of rainfall, even if you have soil that was better able to take moisture in, it's just so much so fast, and with the slope they've got there, I don't think that was a huge factor personally.
We are speaking with Jim Blackburn, who's an environmental lawyer, professor in the practice of environmental law at Rice University, and Judge Emmett, a fellow in energy and transportation policy at Baker Institute, and also our former Harris County judge. If you have comments, questions, and you'd like to join the conversation, give us a call at 713-440-8870. We have Kenneth on the line from South Park. Hello there, Kenneth. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to question for Ed Emmett. And I'm glad he brought that up about the short memory people got, because right here in the city, the infrastructure above ground, I think, is outpacing what's below ground. And I've been here all my life, and as for, drainage and everything like that, I think it's going to come back and bite us for a very long time, and I think it needs to be looked at real good. And before I hang up, I want to thank him and commend him about the things that he did in the community down through the years. And I know he probably remembers, don't, but he ate my mother's food about 50 years ago, when I remember when he was with Big Brother Houston. And you're well connected with the community, man, and I really thank you for what you did, and really like to see you back. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kenneth. I'm very happy at the Baker Institute.
So you're not thinking about getting back into politics at all anytime soon?
But
he brings up a good point, though, about our area.
Well, he talked about the surface infrastructure versus below surface. Former Mayor White, I may quote him a little bit wrong on this, but he used to talk about the fact that a large percentage, maybe 30% of the water is lost in our drinking water system before it ever gets to the tap. It's because the pipes and everything are so old under the city. And of course, I have to put this in as a former county official. Everybody talks about city, city, city. It's the whole region now that we've got to talk about. Houston is fairly stagnant. That's not a negative, shouldn't be a negative word, population growth, but the growth is occurring in the unincorporated part of Harris County. Harris County only gets property tax. They get very few fees. They don't get any sales tax. And so as many people live in unincorporated Harris County as live in the city of Houston, but yet the county commissioners and the county judge are totally hamstrung in the amount of money they have to spend on infrastructure. And then other people can get into the question of what do you prioritize. In my case, I would prioritize flood control and basic infrastructure. But that's the debate. As long as the public doesn't demand that, the elected officials aren't going to give it to them.
713-440-8870. Aga is on the line from Memorial City. Aga, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I have a question to everybody, including Judge. The question is that with the recent disband, the administration getting rid of FEMA, as soon as we have any kind of first things they call federal government for help, I want to ask the judge's opinion, is it a good idea to get rid of, and is it going to cause a lot of disasters in the future and delay response to disasters?
Aga, thank you for your call, Judge.
Well, if I could answer that question, I'd be somewhere else probably. It depends on how it's done. As long as the duties are maintained, then it's not a big problem. Now, I have to say quickly, some folks have said, look at what's already happened. Well, this disaster had nothing to do with that decision.
I agree with that.
I mean, I think everybody, it hadn't had time yet to take effect. But I do think it's important for FEMA. Jim and I were talking again beforehand. The flood maps for Harris County have not been redone since Harvey. That's been 7 years.
Yeah, and it's crazy that they haven't, because we need better information than we have. The current maps are obsolete. Everybody knows anything knows that, and yet we don't have new maps. But I mean, I would say, just in response to the FEMA question, it's not so much the loss of FEMA. I mean, I would change a lot of things with FEMA rather than getting rid of FEMA, but it's just a question of coordination. If the state is in a position to take over those responsibilities and take a much stronger role, I think, probably than they have in the past, I think you can accommodate these types of things. It's how fast you're asking these changes to be made. And, of course, we were talking earlier, the state doesn't want to tax. It's all about tax cuts. And here you're talking about basically more funding requirements coming on the state. So,
yeah, I'd have to jump in and say FEMA is more of an after-the-fact entity when it comes to emergencies. For years, it's always been local and state that has to respond, and FEMA comes in after the fact for the recovery. So, and they've been almost dysfunctional in many ways. So.
Now, just to clarify, the president has been outspoken about his goal of shutting it down completely by the end of this hurricane season and giving states a greater share of the financial burden of disaster recovery. Now, y'all are talking about that it obviously has, as an agency, can be dysfunctional, but you're not necessarily saying that it needs to be phased out completely. Is that correct?
I'm not saying that. I don't.
Yeah.
No, I think we need to look at the functions of FEMA and say, okay, this needs to continue.
Yeah.
This needs to go away. But I'll go back to the floodplain maps. 7 years? Really? Yeah. That's nonsensical.
Well,
I will say funding, Texas has a good Department of Emergency Management. More rural states aren't going to have the resources to do that.
That was the point I was going to bring up. Yeah.
I'm a transportation guy, right? All these people always say, we ought to get all our tax dollars back, our highway tax dollars for our state. Well, if you did that, Montana would never build a highway because, they can't. Well, the same applies to emergency management. And one thing I've got to say, and this is kind of back to Kenneth a little bit, FEMA for years, when they decided about reimbursement after storms, they looked at the dollar value of the damage.
Yep.
Well, that benefits wealthier neighborhoods. That's nonsensical. A house is a house. I mean, you lose your house. And so what we were trying to do at the county, and hopefully they still are, is how many people can benefit from the recovery dollars. It shouldn't be about the dollar value. It should be about people.
Right, and we have that problem with the Corps of Engineers as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an across-the-board problem that we've used financial damage, financial harm as the basis for determining decision-making, and that shouldn't be the criteria.
When did that start? Because that isn't this administration.
It goes back to the 80s and 70s, back with the benefit cost analysis when it first came along.
713-440-8870. Sarah is on the line from Montrose. Sarah, what's on your mind?
Howdy, y'all. First off, to that point that you just made, it shouldn't be financially allotted in a cost-benefit analysis. A life is a life. I grew up in Deer Park, and what I'm sitting here wondering, looking at Kerr County, knowing it's a rural county, when Deer Park kind of developed itself, one of the things that city management kind of made de facto and that everyone has just always accepted as a part of living out there is that a hefty part of your tax dollars will go to the emergency management system that is out there to warn about chemical emergencies. We grew up with a culture of preparedness because we're growing up right there along the world's largest petrochemical refining complex. And we judge time out there by cracks that different companies' explosions have put in our walls. So, that warning system has never failed. Growing up out there, it's a culture of preparedness that was set as a standard by the city government, and nobody cried socialism, nobody cried that this is government overreach or a waste of tax dollars. Everyone, because that standard was set from the top, that these are how our priorities are going to be set living in this area where we're prone to these dangers. And everyone just is prepared. We weren't a very affluent community when that started. But I think with every burden being put back on the states, there's going to have to be a network of municipalities across the states where communities that do have robust emergency management, because that system also doubles as our weather siren system for adverse weather, and it's never failed. So,
Sarah, I'm gonna wrap you right there and give Jim a chance to respond.
Thank you, Sarah, for that comment.
Yeah, it's a great comment. I think certainly the chemical community also is a major part of it. I would tell you the perception of the chemical danger versus the flooding danger is a big difference. And I think part of it has to do that we have downplayed floodplains. I think historically they've always been controversial, certainly in Houston. I don't think we've ever emphasized how dangerous it is to be living in floodplains, and particularly floodways. Up on the Guadalupe, a lot of that damage happened in floodways that, at least theoretically, should not be occupied. And I just don't think we've ever associated the same type of warning and thinking about flooding as we have with the chemicals, which we know can kill you very quickly. And I mean, I commend the chemical industry. I commend Deer Park and all of the ones on the channel for what they've done. I just don't think we've ever elevated flooding to the level that it needs to be. And I would include surge flooding along the coast, would be rainfall flooding, and then also the windstorm side of things. I think all of those have been underplayed as risk, and I think that's going to have to change.
But, Sarah did bring an interesting point, and I think what she was trying to basically say is that this culture of we are going to be prepared at any given moment, right, the sense of urgency might feel different in regards to looking at it culturally from flooding versus a chemical type situation. But do you think that there should have been a higher sense of urgency by local officials in Kerr County?
Well, I mean, certainly after the fact, absolutely. In front of it, yes, I think so. I think that across the board, though, I think it's true in Harris County. I think it's true in every county in Texas with regard to flooding. I just don't think we have historically emphasized the risk and the threat that flooding poses to the extent that at least my research has shown that not only does it, we haven't been hit with the worst yet. Houston hadn't seen it yet. And, one of the things I would note about Beryl as well as all, it seems like we're always being caught by surprise by whatever this new element of the weather is. And I think that has to do with our failure to take a comprehensive view that our climate is changing, try to get the politics out of that as best we can, which I know is almost impossible, but let the science lead us. If we use science well, and reasonable decision-making follows really good, sound science, we'll be in a lot better position than we are right now.
And based on the science, does that mean that these type of extreme weather events are here to stay?
I would say absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, they've been here before.
Yeah.
The question
But now
is,
they're just recurring.
Are they becoming more frequent? I mean,
yes.
The flooding on the Guadalupe was the second largest in history. The largest was back in the 1930s. So, I mean, these things have occurred, but
we will see more of them more frequently That's the worry with hurricanes. We're going to see more 3, 4s, and 5s. We're going to see bigger rainfalls more frequently in the future, is what the predictions are.
Well, and since he mentioned hurricanes, and we are supposed to be talking about Beryl.
Yeah, I was going to
Yes,
say, we never even got to the
we haven't
topic.
heard about
One of
Beryl.
my concerns, and I'll kind of ask Jim this question, all the development that has occurred, Katy Prairie, all out on the west, people all like to talk about the impact on flooding, but my question is, are those homes built to withstand wind?
I think they are not, and that is going to be an issue.
To me, that's an issue that nobody's talking about. But if you go to Florida, you have to put the roofs and tie them down a certain way. You look at that bald prairie out there, and if a storm comes in the right place where you get the dirty side of a hurricane coming, and I drive down to Victoria periodically. There are places down in Horton and Fort Bend County that are even closer to the coast with little homes being put up that I fear if we get a big windstorm, we're going to have a problem.
And there are supposedly fixes that can be done in the roof that can come up with joints and things like that that can be added that we don't require, as far as
That's correct. We don't.
Well, gentlemen, I hope that you're not prophetic in that, but
Yes.
I fear. Thank you for coming in.
Ed Emmett is a fellow in energy and transportation policy at Rice's Baker Institute and former Harris County judge. Jim Blackburn is an environmental lawyer and professor in the practice of environmental law at Rice University. Like Ernie said, thank you both for joining us today.
Well,
Thank you for having us.